Reclaiming the power of sovereign currency, a constitutional and economic framework. 1. The distinction between currency issuers and currency users. A foundational concept in sovereign economics is the distinction between currency issuers and currency users. The United States federal government, as the issuer of its own sovereign currency, possesses unique fiscal powers not shared by subnational governments, households, or private enterprises. While users must acquire currency through labor or borrowing, the issuer creates currency through authorized spending operations. Understanding this distinction reframes fiscal debates and demystifies common misconceptions regarding debt and deficits. Footnote: This section establishes that the federal government, as a currency issuer, has fundamentally different financial constraints than currency users. 2. The legal role of currency and the purpose of taxation. Sovereign currency derives its value not from intrinsic properties, but from legal obligations, specifically, the requirement that taxes be paid in the national currency. This legal requirement generates perpetual demand for the sovereign currency, ensuring its acceptance within the domestic economy. Contrary to conventional belief, taxation does not fund federal expenditures, rather, it serves to regulate aggregate demand and remove excess currency from circulation to manage inflation. Footnote: This section clarifies that federal taxation functions to maintain demand for sovereign currency and manage economic balance, not to fund spending. 3. Government spending as currency creation. Federal spending is the operational mechanism by which new currency is introduced into the economy. This process does not rely on pre-existing revenues but occurs through digital accounting operations that credit private sector accounts. Taxation, by contrast, subtracts currency from the system. This scoring function, akin to adding or removing points in a game, underscores that the issuer cannot run out of its own currency any more than a scoreboard can run out of points. Footnote: This section describes how sovereign spending injects currency into the economy while taxation withdraws it, mirroring a scorekeeping system. 4. Misunderstanding the national debt. Public discourse often mischaracterizes the national debt as a burden comparable to household liabilities. In reality, U.S. Treasury securities function as interest-bearing accounts used to manage interest rates and provide safe savings instruments. Nations like the United States cannot borrow their own currency from external entities in the same way households borrow from banks. The so-called national debt is simply an accounting record of currency that has been spent into the economy but not yet taxed back. Footnote: This section redefines the national debt as a ledger of untaxed currency in circulation, not an indicator of fiscal insolvency. 5. Deficits as a function of savings and demand. Government deficits represent net injections of currency into the private sector and are a necessary response to private saving behavior and trade imbalances. In a capitalist economy driven by consumption and investment, insufficient domestic demand can lead to underemployment and contraction. Federal deficits counteract this by replenishing financial resources through public expenditures, supporting sales, production, and employment. Footnote: This section explains that fiscal deficits supply the economy with currency needed for private saving and demand stabilization. 6. Managing inflation and unemployment through fiscal policy. The core responsibility of a currency issuer is not to balance budgets but to maintain economic equilibrium. This involves calibrating spending and taxation to ensure full employment without triggering inflation. Rather than using fiscal rules such as balanced budgets or arbitrary debt ceilings, sovereign governments must tailor policy to available real resources and output gaps. Economic management requires dynamic adjustment, not rigid accounting constraints. Footnote: This section asserts that the goal of fiscal policy is to balance economic outcomes, not financial statements. 7. Policy implications of sovereign currency authority. Liberated from artificial fiscal constraints, sovereign governments have the capacity to fund essential investments, such as public infrastructure, healthcare, education, and environmental resilience, so long as real resources are available. The limiting factor is not monetary, but physical and social capacity. Responsible use of sovereign currency authority requires democratic accountability, not austerity. Footnote: this section affirms that sovereign spending is constrained by resource availability, not solvency, and should be directed by public purpose. 8. Conclusion: reclaiming democratic control of public finance. Understanding the legal and operational truth about sovereign currency issuance empowers citizens to hold their governments accountable to use public finance for public good. The real fiscal challenge is not affordability, but political will. With informed policymaking, nations can eliminate involuntary unemployment, rebuild critical infrastructure, and promote inclusive prosperity. The United States, as a sovereign issuer, possesses the tools. It now requires the clarity and courage to use them. Footnote: this section concludes that sound public finance rests on informed economic governance and purposeful deployment of sovereign currency powers.